And so last week we were in 2 Corinthians 12, verses 7 through 10, and Paul unpacked for us his own experience of suffering for the Corinthians. And what he taught us is that Jesus' grace is always sufficient for us, perfectly sufficient, always sufficient in every circumstance that may come your way. And this has been a sweet reminder for our family as we have been going through this time of suffering with the loss of our baby recently. And my hope and prayer is that it was also a sweet encouragement and a reminder to you as well. No matter what sorrow, grief, or suffering you are facing, have faced, or will face, His grace is always sufficient. You can count on that, I promise you. But this week, Paul gets back to the issue at hand in Corinth. You see, Paul had waded into his own experience of suffering for the purpose of trying to get the Corinthians back on track. These Christians in Corinth, this church, had been started by Paul. But over the years, they had drifted from the truth. And so Paul had sent multiple letters. He had taken multiple visits to try to get them back on track, to right the ship in Corinth. What Paul is doing with the Corinthians is what we call ministry. It's what we call ministry. You see, I think when we hear the word ministry, it conjures up ideas of church work, right? Like, my job is to do ministry. That's my vocation, that's my job. Or you can volunteer in children's ministry or in youth ministry. Or maybe those missionaries, they do ministry abroad, right? But what we see is that the Greek word used for ministry, diakonia, it's actually not used quite so narrowly. Yes, there are instances in the New Testament where we see the term ministry or service, as it's better known, used for a specific person given a specific task. Like we see in Luke 3:23, Jesus is given his ministry. Or Timothy in 1 Timothy 4:5 is talked about his ministry. Or in Acts 20:24, we see Paul and his ministry. So we do see a specific task for a specific person, but the term ministry is also used broadly to talk about all Christians. I think Ephesians 4:11 through 12 is very informative to us on this. Ephesians 4:11 through 12 says this: "And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers." So these people, he gave them to do what? To equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ. You see, he didn't give us these people for them to do the ministry themselves. These people, your leaders, your deacons, your elders, your pastor, we are given to build you up, to equip you, so that you, being the saints, can go do ministry. And so, what we see here is diakonia, or ministry, simply means to serve. It's where we get our root word serve or deacon often. We are all called, everyone here that proclaims to know Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, are called to serve God by serving others. And so my definition of ministry is this: it's ministry is service to our Lord and Master by intentionally serving and loving others and intentionally pointing them to Jesus. Notice I used the word intentionally twice in my definition. That was not accidental. There is effort involved. There is intentionality needed for us to properly minister to people. Christians, we are all called to ministry. The work of serving others in love, the work of telling people about Jesus. We can minister to our spouse and our children. We can minister to our neighbors and our coworkers. We can minister to our friends, other people here at church, or that kid sitting by himself in the lunchroom. We are called to do ministry, and that is what Paul is doing in his letter to 2 Corinthians. But let's be honest, we don't all do ministry as we know we ought to. We're busy. We feel ill-equipped at times. We are introverted or straight up socially awkward. We just don't know how to do this. And on top of all of our own issues, our own weaknesses, our own shortcomings, we see that ministry is actually difficult. It's not this easy task that we're being called to. There are a number of things that make serving, loving, and showing Jesus to other people a seriously difficult task. Paul knew this well, and that's what he's going to talk about today. Today we're going to be in 2 Corinthians 12, 14 through 21. And in this section, Paul's going to highlight for us some of the difficulties he has experienced in working with the Corinthians. So we're going to be in 2 Corinthians 12, 14 through 21. If you could stand with me as I read for us 2 Corinthians 12, 14 through 21. Our text says this: "Here for the third time I am ready to come to you, and I will not be a burden, for I seek not what is yours, but you. For children are not obligated to save up for their parents, but parents for their children. I will most gladly spend and be spent for your souls. If I love you more, am I to be loved less? But granting that I myself did not burden you, I was crafty, you say, and got the better of you by deceit. Did I take advantage of you through any of those whom I sent to you? I urged Titus to go and sent the brother with him. Did Titus take advantage of you? Did we not act in the same spirit? Did we not take the same steps? Have you been thinking all along that we have been defending ourselves to you? It is in the sight of God that we have been speaking in Christ in all for your upbuilding, beloved. For I fear that perhaps when I come, I may find you not as I wish, and that you may find me not as you wish, that perhaps there may be quarreling, jealousy, anger, hostility, slander, gossip, conceit, and disorder. I fear that when I come again, my God may humble me before you, and I may have to mourn over many of those who sinned earlier and have not repented of the impurity, sexual immorality, and sensuality that they have practiced." You can be seated. So in our text, there are 5 difficulties in doing ministry that I would like to highlight for us this morning. But then what I would like to do is I would like to consider, if ministry is thus so difficult, there are these difficulties, our own weaknesses, then why should we persist in it? Why should we actually try to do the hard work of ministry? The first difficulty I see in our text is pushback. When you do ministry, you will get pushback. You see, whenever you do anything with or for people, you can always expect some pushback, even when you're serving them. I know in my life, the clearest example of this has been with my children. So every day, my wife and I, we cook meals for our children because they're not quite old enough to do it themselves, and we don't necessarily trust them to do it themselves. And so we make them, what we try to make is a nutritious, healthy, good-tasting meal for them to eat at dinner time. And it's almost every night that we get at least one of them, if not the whole band, unionizing together to push back against our service. They do not appreciate the way we are serving and loving them, and they let us know that. So we get pushback frequently at dinner time. Paul's situation was very similar in Corinth. You see, the pushback he's getting here in our text is coming from 2 Corinthians 11. Paul had chosen not to accept payment for his ministerial services in Corinth. What happened is these false teachers that were living in Corinth at the time, they had convinced the Corinthian church that Paul's willingness to work for free was somehow shady. He was doing something underhanded by doing his work for free, or that he was obviously not pedigreed or a good speaker if he didn't charge for his services. And so the Corinthians pushed back against Paul. They said, hey, if you really want to do ministry the right way with us, you need to charge us. You need to ask for our money, and then we'll know you're doing it the right way. In essence, what they were doing is what my kids do. If you want us to eat this food, give us what we want. You see, but Paul wasn't willing to change his methodology just to appease their wrong ideas. He wasn't going to shift just based on their feedback or their pushback. Instead, what we see in our text is we see Paul double down on what he's doing. Look at verse 14 with me. It says, "Here for the third time I'm ready to come to you, and I will not be a burden. For I seek not what is yours. I don't seek your money, but I seek you. For children are not obligated to save up for their parents, but parents for their children." You see, Paul, being their spiritual father, was going to provide for them. He wasn't going to seek what was theirs. He wanted to seek them. Yes, in other contexts, Paul accepted support, but with the Corinthians, he had felt led to refuse their support and instead minister to them for free. And Paul wasn't going to change that even when the pushback came. You need to know that as you do ministry, You must expect pushback. People have different ideas on how best they should be loved, served, and pointed to Jesus. When my wife and I were doing ministry in China, I remember we'd often do these large gatherings with young adults and college students, and many of these new people would come because they were curious about what was going on. And, being a young person event, we would often do some games and some food and then some Bible study and worship. And sometimes these newcomers would approach me and they would say, hey, we really enjoyed this time here, but we're not really into that Bible stuff. Can we just do more games and more food? So they pushed back on our service to them. This was their advice to us. Let's just do more games. Let's just do more fun. Now, it is always wise to listen when you get pushback because there's sometimes something you missed that you need to alter or shift in. Please at least give time and prayer to consider the pushback you've gotten. But I will caution you, it is unwise to always just give in and change your ministry methods based on the feedback of those you're ministering to. Because those people in China that gave me that feedback, we could have shifted. We could have just done lots of games and food, and man, our numbers would have gotten huge. Hundreds, 200s, thousands even, because they really love this kind of stuff. But it would not have borne any gospel fruit. There wouldn't have been really any deeper purpose to it other than some kind of social activity. If you're going to do ministry, expect pushback. Human beings are opinionated, if nothing else. As you love your spouse, as you teach your kids, as you serve your neighbors and friends and coworkers, don't be surprised if they push back. When pushback comes, listen, hear them out, but prayerfully keep your ministry focused on what matters, even if it disagrees with the pushback you received. How you handle the pushback you get will go a long way in the overall success of the ministry you are doing. So the first difficulty we can expect is pushback. The second difficulty we see from our text is that when you do ministry, you can expect to be doubted. People will doubt you. They will question you. Verses 16 through 18 say this, "But granting that I myself did not burden you, I was crafty, you say, and got the better of you by deceit. Did I take advantage of you through any of those whom I sent to you? I urged Titus to go and sent the brother with him. Did Titus take advantage of you? Did we not act in the same spirit? Did we not take the same steps?" You see, when pushback doesn't work, oftentimes people will then move to doubt or questioning, right? Because in their mind, they offered you some amazing advice, right? They said, hey, they didn't listen to my perfect advice, so there must be something else going on. Because my advice was 100% right. So if they chose not to listen to me, they must be crafty. They must be doing something to deceive or to try to trick me, right? And so what happened was the Corinthians moved from just pushing back for Paul to accept money to now actually doubting Paul's character and his collection. You see, Paul did not accept payment for his ministerial services. What Paul did ask for was he asked for the Corinthians to raise some money to give to the saints in Jerusalem who were in need. And this brought doubts for the Corinthians. The Expositor's Bible Commentary says that the collection for the poor at Jerusalem was simply a convenient way to get access to their money. That's what the Corinthians thought. They thought, we know what's going on here. He's raising money really so he can get our money this way. And so notice in our text, Paul uses the word crafty, right? I'm guessing Paul's using that word specifically because we don't find it anywhere else in the New Testament, probably in reference to how they had been describing him. The Helps Word Study says that this word is used only here, and the word crafty, as Paul used it, describes a scoundrel, an unscrupulous person who will do any evil to succeed. I don't know about you, but if you're ministering to people and that's what they think of you, that's not a good sign. I mean, think about, are you guys going to go look for a church with that really crafty, deceitful pastor? That's where I want to go, man. That guy's really known for his craftiness. Man, he gets the better of everyone. Let's go there. And so sadly, when we do ministry, there will always be some who are going to doubt our actions and motives. Because I think human beings, we are natural doubters. But even more than that, our society today has more things to doubt than ever before. I don't know if you've been paying attention to some of these technological advancements, but we have artificial intelligence writing essays for people now. Every teacher's nightmare. And you really can't tell. You've got AI completely fooling people what's going on. We have deep fake videos. You guys know what a deep fake is? They've got technology that can actually put your video onto a video, then just make it up. They can show you doing something that you did not do. That's how good the technology is these days. So even if you see something on video, you can't trust it anymore. It could be totally fake. We've got hackers that are extremely good at what they do. They can get your information. They can trick you into thinking that you're sending a loved one something when you're actually sending them your personal information. And of course, we've got politicians who will promise you everything in the world as long as you vote for them. We should be right to be cautious that we don't just believe everyone out there is out for our good. There are a lot of bad things out there. But into this space of distrust, into this space of doubt, we're called to do ministry. We're called to love, serve, and tell people about Jesus in that space. And the difficult thing with that is people are going to think you're being crafty. People are going to think you're showing love to them, you're serving them, you're doing this for them for some ulterior motive. Or that you're trying to cover up some evil by doing this good thing. I mean, how sad is that that's the world we live in today? As you begin to minister to people, don't be shocked if they doubt or question your love, service, and teaching. Don't let it shock you. Expect it. It's one of the difficulties of doing ministry. This is just a product of where we live today, of the sinful, broken world we live in. How you handle that difficulty, how you handle people doubting you as you love and serve them and tell them about Jesus is going to either hinder or advance your ministry with them. But expect it. People will doubt you. It's going to come. The third difficulty we see, similar to the second, is being misunderstood. See, oftentimes when people do or say something differently than we expect them to, we simply misunderstand them. So we can doubt them, but we can also misunderstand them. Again, in our world today, we expect people to hurt us. We expect people to cheat us. We expect people to take advantage of us. And so when someone comes to us and they love us, they serve us, and they do what is for our benefit, we right away start to wonder, what's going on here? We misunderstand what's happening. And that's what we see happening to Paul in verse 19. In verse 19 it says this, "Have you been thinking all along that we have been defending ourselves to you? It is in the sight of God that we have been speaking in Christ, and all for your upbuilding, beloved." Paul's letters and his visits had the purpose for building up the Corinthians. That's why he was doing this. All for your upbuilding, beloved. Another version says it this way. Everything we do, dear friends, is for your strengthening. That's why Paul wrote this letter. That's why Paul is visiting them. That's why Paul is doing life with them, to build them up. But with so many false ideas swirling around in Corinth, they misunderstood what Paul was doing. All they saw in his letter was defensiveness. Paul doesn't care about us. He just cares about his reputation. He just wants to look good. Yes, I know he says he loves us and cares for us, but we don't really see that. What we see is defensiveness. And so they misunderstood Paul. They didn't understand his letter. They took it the wrong way. Again, as you begin to do ministry, this will happen to you. If you decide, hey, you know what, I really want to minister to my spouse or my children, so you tell them, I want to do a couples devotion with you, or I want to start family devotion time. They might misunderstand that. Well, you haven't done that before. Why now? You just want to impress that new pastor, right? You want to go and tell him I'm doing this, and then it'll make you look good. And so you try to start ministry, and they misunderstand you. Or maybe you decide, you know what, my coworkers, I really want to show them love. I want to serve them this week to show them the love of Christ. And as you do this, they question you because they think you're just trying to butter them up to have them cover for you when you're on leave for the next 2 or 3 weeks. Or when you try to go talk to others about Jesus, and you want to share the gospel with them, and they simply misunderstand you. They think that you're merely trying to show off your holiness or your knowledge or how much you know or how good you look in your Christian attire. This will be a difficulty as you do ministry. You might have the best motives in the world, but it doesn't mean people will always understand them. Just as Paul experienced, there are times we will do something for building others up, and those same people will simply misunderstand what we are doing. This can make ministry difficult, but it's something you need to be prepared for. People will doubt you. People will misunderstand you as you love and serve them. That's the world we live in. That's the ministry we're called to do. The fourth difficulty we see from our text is that we have to do the difficult task of speaking hard truths. When we're called to ministry, we have to speak hard truths. Let's be honest, most people in our world today do not like to rock the boat. Yes, we all know that one guy or that one girl who has no filter and says exactly what they say. Maybe that's you. Don't be that person. A little filter goes a long way, okay? But most of us are very, very happy with harmony, right? I mean, who are we to speak truth into someone else's life? Didn't Jesus himself say, let you who have no sin cast the first stone? And man, I know my sin. I can't be casting any stones. And so what happens is when we have that mindset, when we encounter other professing Christians living in some sort of sin, we choose not to engage. Maybe we say, you know what? I know they're doing the wrong thing, but I don't want to say anything. Let's go tell Pastor. That's his job, right? Pastor does ministry. Let him speak the hard truths. Or maybe we're like, I don't want to bother Pastor with it. It's not that big of a deal. It's just a little sin. I mean, I got my sins. Who am I to say anything to them? And so we kind of sweep it under the rug because if I engage that person in their sinful lifestyle, then you know what? They might not like me as much anymore. It might be awkward to see them at church. You see, what we see is that it's easy to avoid hard truths in church, but Paul shows us here in verse 20 that ministry does involve speaking hard truths. Look at verse 20 with me. For I fear that perhaps when I come, I may find you not as I wish, and that you may find me not as you wish, that perhaps there may be quarreling, jealousy, anger, hostility, slander, gossip, conceit, and disorder. You see, Paul says, I fear that he would go to Corinth and find that the Corinthians had not heeded his warning and taken seriously his admonition about sin. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. But Paul says he also feared that the Corinthians weren't going to be happy to see him. They weren't going to be happy to see Paul because Paul was going to come speaking a hard truth. He was going to come and have to do some rebuking, some discipline, some difficult things to be said. See, Paul wasn't okay with this group of Christians claiming allegiance to Jesus and then living like the rest of society. Paul's duty, his ministry, was to speak hard truths into them. We too, when we do ministry, are called to this task. We are called to speak truth. But with that being said, there are three things I want to highlight, or three caveats I want to give you, because some of you today are like, yes, I love speaking truth. I can't wait to go tell everyone their faults. Hold on. The first thing I want you to be aware of is when you need to speak truth, you need to speak truth fearfully and prayerfully. This isn't something flippant. This needs to be fearful and prayerful. Notice in verses 20 and 21, Paul uses the term, I fear. See, Paul fears that the Corinthians might not be ready for the rebuke and discipline he's about to bring to them because Paul realizes this is a serious situation. This isn't something to be taken lightly. We need to be concerned how the person will receive the hard truth we're speaking into them. And so we shouldn't be flippant about this. We shouldn't just say something in passing or do the Midwest passive-aggressive comment and really hope they change. That is not how we speak hard truths. We are fearful. We're aware, man, I'm going to take this to the Lord and say, God, help me know what to say. Give me the boldness and courage to speak this hard truth because I don't want to, but give them the grace and receptivity to receive this hard truth. Lord, you can do that. So when we speak hard truths, we do it fearfully and prayerfully. It's not flippant, something we just throw out there. But the second thing I want you to realize too is when you speak truths or hard truths, you need to realize there's a difference between the truth you speak to Christians versus the truth you speak to non-Christians. Hear me out on this. The truth does not change, but what we talk about or the message we share does. Notice in our verses, Paul is speaking to those inside the church, people that have said, yes, I am a Christian. Yes, I believe in Jesus. He is calling them just to live holy lives that align with that confession. This isn't the truth that non-Christians need to hear. Non-Christians do not need to hear, hey, you need to behave better. You need to live more like Jesus. You need to dress nicer. You need to talk better. Because that's not going to work. They don't need behavior modification. Non-Christians need Jesus. The truth they need to hear is the gospel. Hey, you're fallen. You're lost. Jesus can forgive you. Repent and believe. That's the truth non-Christians need to hear. See, sometimes in the church we get this confused and we think, hey, let's go out there and clean them up. Let's get everything fixed up, get them sounding like Christians, looking like Christians, then they'll become Christians. And all we produce is legalism and religiosity. You see, for people outside the church, they need to hear the truth of the gospel. For people inside the church, they need to hear how their lives are aligning with that gospel truth. And so again, as you speak the truth, be aware who you're talking to. We need to speak hard truths to our non-Christian neighbors and our Christian family, but they need to be different based on where those people are at in their walk with the Lord. Third thing to highlight with speaking the truth is we need to speak the truth in love. We need to speak the truth in love. I love what Ephesians 4:15 and 16 says. Paul says it this way. He says, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, with each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. Said another way, 1 Corinthians 13:1 says it like this: if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. You see, we are called as we do ministry to speak hard truths, but if your motivation behind that hard truth is not your love for God and your love for that person, it might be best just to keep your mouth closed. I know some of us think our truth arrows are really, really effective, but I'll be honest, I have not seen truth arrows shot at others having the effect we had hoped for. It just doesn't. Instead, check your heart. Make sure that before you share this hard truth, are you really desiring the glory of God, and are you really desiring their benefit, their good? Because the truth is that hard truths, difficult things to say, even things that people disagree with us about, even things people don't want to hear, when they're said in love, they produce some really, really good stuff. I love what Proverbs 25 says about this. Proverbs 25:11 and 12 says this: a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in the setting of silver. Like a gold ring or an ornament of gold is a wise reprover to a listening ear. That is what speaking hard truths can do, but we need to make sure we check ourselves before we do it. So that fourth difficulty is that when we have to speak hard truths, that's a difficult thing to do. It's awkward. We don't like to do it. But if we're going to minister to people, we must speak hard truths. The final difficulty we see from our text is that as we do ministry, people simply don't grow and change. One of the hardest things that you will face in ministry is that when all the time, effort, and energy that you have poured out into someone's life comes to feel like nothing. This is exactly what Paul was dealing with in verses 20 and 21. Again, let's look at those verses. It says this: for I fear that perhaps when I come I may find you not as I wish, and that you may find me not as you wish, that perhaps there may be quarreling, jealousy, anger, hostility, slander, gossip, conceit, and disorder. I fear that when I come again, my God may humble me before you, that I may have to mourn over many of those who sinned earlier and have not repented of the impurity, sexual immorality, and sensuality that they have practiced. I mean, you can almost imagine Paul's kind of demeanor here, right? Oh man, I've sent so many letters to them. I've visited them a number of times. I sent friends, disciples to go and train them up, and they still don't get it. I mean, what's it going to take to get through to these people? Why do I keep trying so hard and they're not getting it? This had to have been frustrating and difficult for Paul. Paul has invested so much into these people, and yet they're still struggling to live a life that accords with the gospel message. They're still struggling with some basic things that Paul would like them to move on from. I love what he says in verse 21. I may have to mourn over you. I mean, that's what this is. It's an apt description of what happens when you minister to someone and they just don't change. They don't hear it. They don't grow. There's nothing different in their life. And this makes ministry difficult. You see, all it takes is one person that you've invested very heavily into to go a very different way to just completely shatter your confidence in your ministry. And we had situations like this when we were doing ministry in China, my wife and I. We would pour our lives into people, spend tons and tons of time. There's a few of them that come to mind right now that we spent years working with, sharing the gospel, going on trips, having over, doing Bible studies, praying for them, talking with them, and nothing. Nothing. That can be difficult because when that comes, we can start to question if we're doing something wrong. Maybe I'm not really cut out for ministry. Maybe this is why those professionals should do this. I'm not good enough to share my faith. I'm not good enough to help them, so I need to find someone else. I shouldn't do this anymore. You see, you need to remember that no matter how well you minister to people, how well you serve them, love them, and show them Jesus, there are some who will never come along or make any progress. I mean, Paul had those who never got it. He had people that never came anywhere closer to Christ through his ministry. I mean, Jesus himself had people that didn't get it. I mean, so if Jesus had people that didn't get it, I think we're in good company here. You see, we need to remember our duty isn't to make people change because we cannot change people. Only God can change people. Our duty is just to minister. Love, serve, go, teach, train. Let God do the work that he alone can do. But that's still hard. That's still hard because when you invest time, effort, and energy into someone and they don't grow and change, that hurts. It's very, very difficult to go through that and see that. Now, I know that many of you already had some trepidations this morning about doing ministry, and now you came and heard this sermon, and now you're convinced that you're going to avoid ministry altogether. Great job, Pastor Dustin. You've completely crushed our spirits. I get it. I mean, I totally get it. I mean, you already know your weaknesses, your shortcomings, and here I am this morning telling you that when you go and love, serve, and tell other people about Jesus, it's going to be really, really hard. That when you go out there, people are going to push back when you serve them. That when you show people love, they're going to doubt you or misunderstand you. That you're going to have tough, awkward conversations with people that you don't want to have. And that to top all of that off is as you do this, those people might not listen to you. They might not grow. They might not change. Nothing will seemingly come of it. In this space, why should we do ministry at all? I mean, doesn't this seem like we've lost the battle before we've even begun to fight it? You see, I tell you, all of these difficulties today, not to try and hinder the ministry that God has called you to. I don't want you to get downcast because it's difficult. What I'm trying to do is twofold. One, I want you to realize that ministry, this is what it looks like. It's not always glamorous. It's not always easy and fun. It is difficult. It's a grind. It is hard work. But more importantly, I want you to see that for all of the difficulty that ministry has, it is totally, totally worth it. Why do we do ministry? Because it's worth it. That's why. I love verse 15. Verse 15 is a life verse. Circle it, highlight it, underline it. Whatever you do, memorize it. Verse 15. I will most gladly spend and be spent for your souls. Right in the middle of all the difficulties, right in the middle of everything going on wrong in Corinth, Paul says this, I will most gladly, with joy, with passion, with delight, pour my life out for your benefit. How can he say that? After having gone through all of these difficulties with these people, how can he say that? Because pouring yourself out for others is one of the greatest joys we can have in this life. I believe that God has wired us in this way, and it's the Imago Dei. It's a way we reflect the glory of God as we get joy by seeing others grow closer to Jesus. Yes, I know that sin has caused us to think that what really will bring us joy is self-focused fun, frequent trips to the lake in the summer, doing fun things, chasing our pursuits and our hobbies. That is where we'll find joy. But I'm going to tell you that no, joy, true joy, is found in pouring yourself out in love and service to others that they may see and experience more of Jesus Christ. That you, being so filled up by Jesus' all-sufficient grace that we talked about last week, you would be so brimming and overflowing with his grace, so excited about who he is, it would naturally flow into others. You would want other people to join in the excitement of experiencing his all-sufficient grace. I mean, parents, is this not the joy of parenting? Any of you that are parents, you know parenting is extremely hard. And from the sound of it, we've got littles, but as I talk to people with older children, it doesn't necessarily get easier. It's hard. Why do we do this to ourselves? Because there's joy there. Pouring yourselves out for your children, showing them Jesus, loving them, serving them, and then actually seeing by God's grace them grow is a joyful thing I think any parent in here would readily say. But it's not just in our families. The same is true when we minister to others. I'm going to share 2 stories really quick. My wife and I, when we were in China, we got to work with some different people. One name comes to mind. Her name is Maggie. That's her English name. She was a girl. She was in my university class when I taught English at the university. Came as a non-Christian. Didn't know anything about Jesus, the Bible, anything. But we invited her to come to Bible study. And by God's grace, she came and connected. And she grew. And she changed. And she became a Christian. And Andrea poured time into her, discipling her, training her. And man, she's doing some really, really cool stuff over there now. Working with the Chinese church, discipling people, training people, sharing the gospel, doing the work of an evangelist. It has been really cool to see her growth. Or I got a chance to work with a young man named Ray. Again, that's his English name. Ray came to me as a kind of a baby Christian, had just become a Christian. And so I got a chance to work with him and just pour into him. Disciple, train. I put him in some leadership opportunities, gave him a chance to experience that. I just messaged with Ray the other day through their chatting platform. Ray's getting ready to get married. He's preaching at his church sometimes. He's leading Bible studies. I mean, that's God's work. God did the work in Maggie and Ray's lives, but God chose to use me, my wife, and others in some small way to be a part of his glorious process. God used us to minister to these people. And as difficult as it was, and it was difficult, it was worth it. It was totally worth it. That's my encouragement to all of you this morning. If you're standing on the sidelines of ministry, only wanting the professionals to do ministry, you're missing out on some really awesome stuff. You're missing out on what I would say is your true calling in life. Maybe you aren't sure how to get started doing ministry. I totally get that. You're like, I haven't done ministry. I don't know where to start. Well, we want to help you with that. In late August, I'm going to introduce this initiative to help you kind of with some practical ways that you can do ministry. Practical ways you can do ministry with your family, in our community here in Hastings, here in the church, with your neighbors or coworkers. But all these practical tips and guidance, they're not going to mean much if you lack the motivation to do ministry. You see, above all else, you need to realize the delight of ministry. Count the cost of ministry. And see that the gain of pressing into those around you with the grace of Jesus Christ far outweighs any of the difficulties we've talked about today. Yes, there is a lot of difficulty in ministry. My job bears witness to that fact. But man, oh man, there is so much more delight. Jesus saw this. I mean, can you imagine how difficult ministry was for Jesus and still is today? Because in one sense, it's really easy for him because he's perfect, but in another sense, it was really difficult. Because our ministry is, we are bumbling, fallen, sinful sheep working together with other bumbling, fallen, sinful sheep, and we get frustrated by them, do we not? I mean, can you imagine Jesus? Perfect, spotless, sinless Son of God has to deal with us. Our shortcomings, our constant failures. I mean, we push back against him, do we not? We doubt him. We misunderstand him. We don't want to hear his hard truths from his word, and we don't grow and change as we ought to. Man, Jesus' ministry is extremely difficult because we are. And yet, Jesus takes much delight in ministry. This is why we look to Jesus. We look to him for the all-sufficient grace to minister to others. We can't do it in our own power. But we also look to his example. His example of letting the delight gloriously outshine the difficulties. Hebrews 12, 1 and 2 says this. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight, all the difficulties, and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus. He's our example. the founder and perfecter of our faith, and this is what he did. For the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. That is why we look to Jesus. He despised the shame because of the joy that was set before him, because of the delight in seeing people come to know him. Test me on this. Test me on this week, this month, this year. Go and test me. Go, minister, make disciples, love people, serve people. Minister to your family, show them Jesus. Minister to your coworkers, your neighbors, your friends. Help them experience more of Jesus and see if Jesus doesn't just fill you up so greatly with his all-sufficient grace and a delight in him that it overwhelms all of those difficulties in your life. Test me on it. Come back and tell me, because I guarantee you will not see a falling in this. Jesus will fill you up with his grace. Let Jesus fill you with his grace to overcome the difficulties of ministry. And then set your eyes on the delight of seeing Jesus made much of in others' lives. That is what keeps us going. See what joy comes in ministry. I hope you will join me in this task of serving, loving, and reaching other people with the gospel. There is great delight here, great joy. Jesus can do it in your life. I trust he will.